February 1, 1991, Sarah Tucker interview with Nancy Parrish, Senator, Kansas 19th District. This is February 1st, 1991. I'm Sarah Tucker interviewing Senator Nancy Parrish. Let me start out with a complicated question. It might be easy to answer, might not. You are Senator from the 19th District.
Yes.
How did you come to first represent the 19th District and be in this office?
Okay, mine came a little bit unusual way. There are a few of us that have come in under an appointment. Basically, my husband had been representing this district, and because of business reasons, he needed to resign from the seat. And when an individual that's in an elected office like representative or a senator resigns, then what happens is that the precinct committee people within that district of that party select who should be the replacement, and then ultimately the governor appoints the person that the precinct committee individuals have chosen. When I knew that Jim was going to resign, it seemed to me that I'd done a lot of campaigning in the district. I'd taken a lot of the constituent calls. I was very interested in the process. I thought I had some things to offer, so I decided, well, somebody's going to be appointed, why not me? And so I talked with the precinct committee people within the district, and there was a race for the appointment. It was not uncontested. A gentleman from Valley Falls also was seeking the seat, and so we both ran, and I was appointed, and that was in for the 1980 session. I served one session, and then that following November was elected on my own to a 4-year term in the Kansas Senate in a contested race.
So in a way you got it the old-fashioned way, the wife of a man who
That's right.
quit, but at the same time in a rather new-fashioned world. Tell me how you won your contested nominations and how you won your first election. What did you do right to get chosen?
It was a little easier, obviously, with the precinct committee individuals as far as time frame, because you needed to talk with, I can't even remember how many it was at that time, like 30 or 40 individuals that would be making the selection. So I went to visit them at their homes, called people on the phone, and basically solicited their support in my nomination as Jim's, my husband's successor in that position. In the general election, obviously you've got the number of people in a state senate seat is ideally 58,000 people. That doesn't mean 58,000 voters, because children and people that have not been registered to vote are counted in the 58,000. So you've got a large district. And I had what I consider to be a very formidable candidate, the gentleman that ran for the 19th Senatorial District in 1980 was the former director of the Kansas Bureau of Investigation, and also the former superintendent of the Highway Patrol. Had been appointed by a Democrat, and although it's a fairly good Democrat district, I felt that that I really needed to work very hard in order to retain that seat. And I had enjoyed being in the one session, but I didn't want it to only be one session in the legislature. So I did work very hard in basically doing all of those kinds of things that you do to get elected. I guess the main thing I did was to spend about 2 months going door to door in the district, and that was like from the time I got off work, which at that time I was teaching school out at Topeka State Hospital, working with emotionally disturbed children, and I can get off about 3:30, and I would hit the streets at that point in time and work till it got dark, and then I would go all day Saturday and noon Sunday until it got dark, and that was for probably about 9 weeks. Ended up being the time frame, plus the copies and the candidates' nights and all the other things that you need to do in order to be successful excuse me, in a legislative race. So I worked hard.
Now, did your opponent work hard the same way, or did
Yes.
he? Yeah.
Yes, he did. I can't tell you, whether he had the same strategy that I did to spend that much time going door to door. But yes, he was very visible in the election. He was going door to door. He did have coffees. He appeared at the candidates' nights. He was not someone that just put his name out and then kind of sat back. He very much was involved in the campaign. I may have hit more doors than he did. I would suspect that I might have.
Well, leaving aside hitting a few more doors, why did you win?
Combination of things. I think women have a good opportunity to be elected, particularly it seems like in that time period. I think it continues to be that way, that voters, it was close enough at that time to the Watergate situation, and I think that a lot of individuals were leery of perhaps the people that you might describe as the good old boys, and I think it was refreshing to a certain extent to see a woman that was interested in running and being elected. I think I had good qualifications. I think, although mine may not side by side to his may have been a little bit better as far as experience in government. I had some pretty good solid qualifications as well, educationally as well as job experience, etc. I think I benefited a lot. I mean, on the other side, because it was a very good Democrat district, and I'm a Democrat, I benefited from my husband's last name, the name recognition. Mm-hmm. So certainly all of those were factors. And I guess I would have to say those were the items. Hard work, name recognition, Democrat, and the fact that I think I did have some good qualifications.
Would you spell out what you think your qualifications were that mattered?
I had been a teacher. I had been a teacher in that area, and so I knew a lot of the parents in the area from teaching in 2 different elementary schools in that particular area. I had been involved in community activities in that area, so I think I felt like I knew a lot of the people, and I had a sense of what they would want, how they would want to be represented, and what kind of issues were important to them. I'd been on the Boys Club Board of Directors and some other Shawnee County Mental Health Association, some other things that I had been involved in. Had an undergraduate degree in education, master's degree in special education. I had been a property owner and manager. My husband and I had, and I think at that time still did have some apartments that we had managed, and I had been the primary person responsible for renting the apartments. So I used that as part of my qualifications, that I was a businesswoman, understood. Mm-hmm. Paying taxes and the expenses of a business, because we had been, small business owners. I had done all the bookkeeping for that particular operation. So those were the things that I had done. Obviously, I had not held state office like my opponent had, but I felt that I did have some solid qualifications. Mm-hmm. Different, obviously, than his. I was not as law and order and all that, but I had good. I talked about education. I talked about children's programs and issues, and those are some of the things that I still am talking about, because those are some of the interests that I find I share with many of my constituents.
Okay. So were there any issues that divided you and your opponent?
Yes. The death penalty was one that definitely divided the two of us, because I was an opponent to the death penalty and continued to be, and he was certainly an advocate. And that was used in the campaign.
Okay.
Otherwise, there were probably not a lot of things that came out in the campaign showing the contrast between the two of us. I think there probably were a lot of other differences, but that was the primary one that was used in the campaign.
Now, everybody tells me the same thing. No matter how hard you work, you can't win a campaign by yourself. Mm-hmm. What kind of people helped you do the campaign itself? Who were your best supporters?
Women, I would say, but they were not necessarily women's groups or organized women's groups, but friends that I had. I think I drew more on personal relationships with friends that I had known, other teachers and individuals. I also I have 3 younger sisters, and they all came down for weekends. They didn't live here at that time. Well, one of them actually lived here, and then 2 others did not. But they all came down for weekends and joined in and went door to door. So, my mother-in-law, my parents, it was really family effort. Jim didn't ever do any door to door, which was kind of an interesting. because I had done an awfully lot of door-to-door with my husband, but he preferred at that point in time, I think partly he was tired of doing door-to-door, but partly I think he felt he'd rather take more of a consultant role in the campaign, and so that was more of the role that he took. And he was a very good advisor, and he did work hard, but he didn't do any of the direct campaigning like door-to-door.
That's interesting. Okay, you've made it into the legislature. Can you tell me what it was like when you first got there, your freshman legislature? And I'm thinking of things like the power structure there, what committees you got on, whether you had any mentors or supporters, your first experience in the legislature.
It was when I went in 1980. I was the second woman in the Senate, so it was way back. We've come a long way since then. Plenty of time. Senator Jan Myers was the only woman, and then I joined her in 1980, and then there were more women that were elected then in November of 80, but for that one session there were just the two of us. And she certainly welcomed me warmly, and I enjoyed feeling like there was someone else there that I could talk to that that was a woman, and that and certainly was glad to see probably another woman join the ranks. I would have to say though that that the Senate, you're so busy that in many times the sad part about it, and I find myself doing the same kind of thing, is that you don't have a lot of time to spend as a mentor for someone else, or in the personal social kinds of activities. Sometimes you're just so caught up in the day-to-day activities that there's not a lot of time to just, have a quick bite of lunch together or whatever. So we didn't, Jan and I did not spend an awful lot of time together, but it was nice to know that she was there, and certainly it was real helpful later on when there were other women there as well. I think it was pretty much of a good old boys network to a certain extent at that time, and I think everyone was getting a little bit used to having more women as part of the body, and I saw some struggles that Jan had. I had felt at times, although everyone was very nice and very cordial, there were times that I guess I felt like a little bit like a little girl joining the ranks, and there was a little patting on the shoulder of Nancy, this is the way we do it, and fatherly advice, if you will, regarding certain things, which I think was all well intended, but sometimes it was a little hard to feel totally unequal to some of the other members at that point in time. And which was one of the reasons that later on I decided that I was going to go to law school and increase my qualifications and credentials, and also broaden my knowledge in an area that I thought would be helpful. Not only in just making good decisions in the legislature, but I suppose partly to also to build my credibility with my fellow legislators.
Okay. What committees did you ask for? What committees did you get, if you can cast your mind back to the first time?
When I came in on the appointment, it was kind of unusual because at that point in time, you are the bottom of the barrel as far as seniority, and obviously my husband had some fairly good committee assignments that were not automatically going to flow to me, and did not flow to me because there were others that were standing in line. When he left, they wanted to juggle around. And so my committee assignments that first session were not particularly wonderful. They were okay, but they were not. I've certainly bettered them since that time as I gained more seniority. I'm trying to remember what I was on. I was in local governmental organization. I didn't have education at that time. I didn't have judiciary. A lot of the committees that I've really enjoyed since that time. So I didn't have very many committees. So I was basically just getting my feet wet. I did do much better on committee assignments once I was elected in November, and beginning with the 1981 session. That improved immensely at that point in time.
Well, just taking then the whole last 10 years, what committees have you wanted to be on? Are you on? What kind of strategy or goals do you have in terms of what committees you want to be on, and how's it going?
It's going very well, and at this point, and boy, so that the committee assignments are basically made by the leadership in the House and the Senate, and if you support the correct person in leadership races, you do much better in getting good committee assignments. In 1980, I was still new, and I was lucky enough to support the correct person that won the leadership race at that time, and did okay on committee assignments, but it wasn't really all that well. Then in 1984, the gentleman that had been the minority leader, Jack Steiniger, for a number of years, was challenged by Mike Johnston, and I did support Mike Johnston, and also became at that time part of the leadership. I was one that was elected, and my title is policy chair for the Senate Minority Party, and which meant that I was not only on the right side of the leadership race, but I also was one of those that would be involved in selecting who got what committees, and I helped myself a lot, and I think all of us did that were in leadership at that point in time. Generally, you're the ones sitting around the table deciding how we shuffle what everyone's requests are with the committees that are available, and taking into consideration seniority and other factors, and I did very well at that point in time, because I think I got most of the ones that I did request. I had asked to be on the tax committee, assessment and taxation committee. I was granted that request. I got on judiciary. I had been, as of 1981, on the education committee, continued that committee assignment, and so I did very well. Then in 88 or 89 session, after the 88 election, I was appointed to Ways and Means Committee, which was one that I asked for. I did have to lobby for that one, even though it was still part of the leadership, and there, it was a little bit difficult. Those are highly sought after committee slots, and the other factor was there had never been a woman on Ways and Means before, ever, on the Senate side, and rumor had it that there was some talk about that women might be too disruptive on the Ways and Means Committee, and then I don't know, but anyway, they did in fact appoint two women in 1989. Senator Alicia Salisbury and myself both received a position on the Ways and Means Committee, and have been serving on there for the past 2 years. That was the third session that we've been on Ways and Means. So it was really, I was really pleased to be appointed to that committee, and I don't think we've been too disruptive. I think we've been all right.
You sound very professional when you talk about being a member of the legislature. You went to law school at least partly to gain credibility as a legislator. You're talking about these committees. Do you see yourself continuing to run for, be in the legislature for the foreseeable future? Can you tell me how you see your future in terms of politics?
I don't think I intended to be in the legislature forever, but I find myself liking serving in the legislature better and better as I get more seniority and get to be more a part of the decision-making process, because it seemed like the first few years I was listening a lot and didn't see a lot of opportunity to impact the decision. Certainly I was one of the votes, but not to really being part of the group that was really deciding whether you have this in a bill or that in a bill, or really changing public policy or maintaining, sometimes you're in the defensive mode as well in passing or in looking at various pieces of legislation. I find that I probably like it better than I like practicing law, because I am currently practicing law right now. Though at some point I think I want to have just one job. It's very hectic for family and for my business and my clients on the law side of the private side of it, when the legislature takes up as much time as it does. And although that's my favorite part of the jobs, if you compare them one to another, it may be that at some point I'm going to have to make a choice, and I'm not sure what that choice is going to be. I'm not there yet, but I would certainly like to run for another term. My term would be up in 2 more years, and I would like to run for another term, and beyond that, I'm not sure.
Okay. Are there some big issue fights, some big bills that you wrote or sponsored or helped get through that you're particularly proud of, you remember as particularly important things you've been involved with?
Yeah, in fact, last session was a pretty good one as far as being involved in a lot of issues. And I guess I've been involved in a lot of issues in 2 major areas, in the education area and then also in more of the human services area. But last session, it seemed like it was one that a lot of things kind of came together, and I was able to be a part of some fairly major changes, some things that have been around for a while that finally we were able to get enacted last session. One of them, I served, it's about 1982, as chairperson of a group called the Advisory Commission on Juvenile Offender Programs, and the state has been receiving money from the federal government to basically, the purpose has been to try to get juveniles out of adult jails and lockups. And it's not a problem in the urban areas because there are detention centers available in those areas, but in the rural areas you've got a lot of kids that are in adult jails, and the statistics show that the suicide rate is much higher, and you have the isolation, you have children getting no programs when they're locked up in an adult jail. And so we've been working on this for, like I said, 8 years, and last session we were able to get a bill passed that would phase in a prohibition of holding kids. And I might add that many of the kids that are being held in the rural area are not juveniles that have committed any crimes. They are runaways. They are girls that have run away from placements, either group homes or they've run away from their own home, and because of the fear of law enforcement that they will be promiscuous or they will hurt themselves if they are turned loose, they are locked up as an alternative. And it may be that they need to be in a secure environment, but my opinion is that they don't need to be in a county jail for that type of behavior. And so we've worked real hard. And last session we not only got the prohibition into the law, but we also were able to get some funding to build juvenile detention centers, regional ones, throughout the state. And been working on that in my off time since that, and it's going pretty well at this point in time. So I also was real involved in an adoption law that passed last session, and it was a whole codification of the adoption laws, and was instrumental in getting a provision in that would provide insurance through for the birth of the child, and an option to provide insurance for the birth mother's delivery cost if the adoptive parents carried insurance, which has not always been the case for all insurance policies. Insurance policies really have excluded both of those, at least for some insurance policies, and we did get that through. And I think it's a real helpful device for those families that are middle to low income families that would not be able to adopt because of financial problems if the birth costs are not covered through their insurance. And so that was one thing. There's some others. I've been able to, one other, I guess, that I would cite that I felt pretty good about, and that was developed a concept of a hold harmless clause. It's part of the school finance there has been part of the school finance formula 2 or 3 years ago, which really helped provide a continuation of funding for some of the urban districts that really received a real decrease in state funding for schools due to the lower valuations in the rural area. And it really caught a lot of urban districts in a position where they were going to be losing millions of dollars in state funds, and Topeka Public Schools was one of those districts, and we were able to at least phase in that loss by use of this provision called the hold harmless, which was my original idea, and I was kind of glad that had worked out, which is this tax saving to people in my district, and I think and not a bad concept, because districts can't take a $2 million hit in 1 year. That kind of loss is just very difficult to budget for.
As you look over then 10 years, 10 plus years of your own involvement in the Kansas legislature, and quite a few years before that where you knew a lot about the Kansas legislature, focusing in on women in the legislature, women's issues, women's legitimacy, how much change, what kind of change have you seen over this period of time?
Well, certainly numbers alone. There have been major increases in the number of women that are serving in the legislature, and along with that, as more women have served, certainly more women have seniority and now are in leadership positions, chairmen of committees, and in leadership in their respective parties, which I think is a major change, because I think that sometimes decision making occurs in a bit different way when women are very involved in how the decisions get made, and I think that is a big change that I'm seeing due to women being involved. I mean, women process information a bit differently and work a bit more, I believe, and this is probably a bias, and probably someone could certainly rebut it, but I think that looking for consensus and trying to come to an agreement on an issue, where I think sometimes that has not always been the case in the way that legislation is passed. Not so much, I think the good old boy network was maybe a more of a trading of things, and where the consensus, I think, is maybe a better way to resolve an issue.
It's real interesting. In terms of issues, do you see any shift in what issues are taken seriously, which issues are important, that would relate in any way to women's interests, whatever that means?
I don't like the term women's interest really that well. I know
this is something that some people have brought up, and I'm interested to know how many others would agree or disagree.
And although I don't like the term, because I really think it's people issues is what we're talking about, rather than maybe highway issues or business issues or something like that. But the more human service kinds of issues, I do see those rising to a higher priority. I don't know whether I can attribute it to more women being involved in the legislature, and I'm not even sure we're at higher priority yet. They're higher visibility at this point, and I'm hoping that that's going to translate into higher priorities as far as how money gets spent. I'm not sure in my mind that I would say we're there yet. I think we're moving in that direction. I think women have had a lot to do with that, because I think they are very close to a lot of the issues that I'm talking about. I mean, the issues that, how much money goes into the AFDC programs, daycare, subsidies for poor women, issues, even like some of the mental health reform issues, issues obviously dealing with education, all of those kinds of issues. I think women certainly have been very involved in the debate and many times carrying some of those bills. Though I also see women very involved in tax issues, economic development issues as well, and so I would not want anyone to think that as a group that women are more skewed toward that type of issue. I will admit that my highest priorities are not the economic development issues, and I love the tax committee, and I really like those issues, but I suppose the ones that I've spent my time on as an individual legislator have been more in the area of some of the children and youth issues and budgetary issues for some of those programs that I have felt that in the past have maybe not received as much attention as some of the other issues.
Okay. Could I get you to just give me your impression of your district? Let me rephrase that. What's your district like? Its makeup and so on. Just a second. Okay. Could you describe your district's makeup?
Got a mixture of individuals within my district. I've got a lot of blue-collar workers. I have a lot of people that work out at Goodyear, Santa Fe, et cetera, because I have the east side of Topeka, and I also have north, Seaman, the whole Seaman Township area. So I certainly have a lot of blue-collar workers. In the East Topeka area, I have a high concentration of minority individuals, both blacks within certain parts of East Topeka, and then I also have the area around Our Lady of Guadalupe Church, which has a high number of Hispanic residents in that area. So certainly I have a mixture as far as race in my district, and economic level. I do too, though I wouldn't categorize my district as having a high number of high-income individuals. Certainly there are some high-income individuals within my district, but I would say the majority of my district would be middle income, maybe some high middle income, and then some low-income areas within my district. I think people in my district are certainly hard workers, people that are certainly concerned about taxes. A lot of them, I think, are struggling to make a go of it in today's economy and all of that. I think, not sure that in some ways some of the individuals in my district may not be as actively involved in some of the groups. And when I go out to some of the special interest meetings, and don't always find a high percentage of the people in my district involved in some of those groups. But I think a lot of it is because that it's real tough. It's a lot of single-parent families within my district, and it's very difficult when you have small children and you're struggling to really make ends meet. You don't have a lot of time for extra meetings, etc. Though I do have a lot of people that do go, but in comparison to maybe some of the other districts, maybe a less amount of people that are involved in those kind of meetings. I have groups of people that are, though, on the other hand, very involved in the neighborhood improvement associations, very active in those groups, and spend countless hours volunteering for those right there within their community. And so a lot of good people within my district, and people that I like. In the Oakland area, I particularly like campaigning over there. There are a lot of senior citizens over there, and I think if there's any one group of individuals that I really like to talk with, and partly because they have some time to talk with you as you're going door to door. It's the senior citizens, and I've delightful stories about some of the people I met during the campaign that, had I not been campaigning, would never have had the opportunity to meet. And so I think those are some of the things I really like about campaigning and the people in my district.
Do you like campaigning? Do you enjoy it?
Mm-hmm. I do. It's almost too much of a good thing at one time, because it's so all-consuming when you are campaigning, and it'd be nice to be able, and I suppose you could arguably you could do this, but if you could spread it out a little bit more. But it seems like so much has to be done in such a short time that it's pretty frenzied. But I do like it, particularly the one-on-one kinds of contacts. That's my favorite part of the campaign, and more in person. I'm not a real good phone person. I like to talk with people in person.
Well, let me turn a little bit more to you as a person. Why are you a Democrat?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, I think part of it, I suppose, is the way you grow up to a certain extent. My parents actually were not Democrats, though. My parents were Republicans, but I had a close cousin that ran for the legislature when I was in high school, and he ran for my home county, and he ran on the Democrat ticket. And so then the whole family sort of switched to Democrats. At least most of the family did. Some of my aunts and uncles retained their Republican registration, but sort of disowned the rest of us at that time. Because I had an uncle that was served in the Kansas legislature as a Republican way back in the early 50s. And I had a cousin that served, which would have been the late, about the middle 60s, 65, 64, 65 was when he went into the legislature. That's when I became a Democrat from the family point of view. Though, as I've gotten involved myself, and I was a member of the Young Democrats at K-State and all that, so I've been a Democrat really on record for a long time. I do find, though, that I believe in what our party, at least what I believe our party stands for. My own views are very similar to the views of our party, making sure that there is an equal shot for those people that are the working people, making sure that, and I guess I kind of lean more toward the labor side of it than the management side of it. When you have labor management type issues, making sure that those people that are the least fortunate do have a voice and that they are adequately taken care of. So you're talking about your elderly citizens and the people that are economically disadvantaged, the children. So and I believe that our party does try to take care of those individuals and speaks out very strongly for that group of people. So I guess I'm very comfortable being a Democrat.
Tell me about your childhood. Tell me about this semi-Republican, semi-Democratic family you grew up with. Where are you from? What were your parents like?
Oh,
are they like?
They're both deceased now. I grew up in Cedarvale, Kansas, which is a small town in southeast Kansas, and grew up I was the oldest of 4 girls. Had a real good, normal family. My mother didn't work, but was a very strong individual. She was a member of the WASP during World War II and was a pilot. And was a very independent, spirited woman, very neat woman, and I certainly learned a lot from her. My dad was a farmer, rancher. Both of them had gone to KU. My dad did not graduate. My mother had a college degree in business, which was kind of unusual at that time as well. So I grew up in a real good kind of family. It was a very small town, and you could be involved in as many activities as you wanted to in high school, and I was, and I did well in school. School was always important. Went off to K-State and was involved actually in Democrats up there, but I didn't really do that much with that. But I was a member of the Student Senate when I was at Kansas State University, and so I had ran for office there as a college student. So I got a little bit of experience with governmental bodies at that point in time. Then basically I met my husband. We got married and moved to Topeka where he started law school, and we ended up, we've been here ever since, and that was in 1970. So we've been in Topeka residents for quite some time. My dad was one of 7 boys, and this was one of his older brothers that had been in the legislature, and I paged for my Uncle Robert when I was in 2nd grade, and we came up to Topeka, and I spent 2 or 3 days up here with my Aunt Irma and my Uncle Robert. So that was the first time I was ever in the Capitol building when I was about 7 years old.
That's a wonderful memory. Well, obviously, your husband is involved in politics.
Right.
Which is, I presume it's a help, that it makes it easier on your relationship that both of you are involved in it. How does it work? How do you manage to do being a lawyer and being in the legislature and meeting your family responsibilities? How do you juggle all of this?
I'm not sure I do it very well at times, but certainly you have to have a lot of help from others and a lot of support from your spouse, which I do have. And it does help having Jim being involved too, because I find actually when I first was in the Senate, first became a member of the Senate, Jim was not involved as state chair. I mean, that has come more in recent years. And I think it was harder at that point in time because Jim really missed the Senate. He'd gotten out, but that was really his true love, and it was really kind of tough. And I was finding I needed to be a lot of places, and it was real optional for him to be there. It was a little hard for him to be the spouse. I'd been the spouse for a lot of years when I accompanied him because lobbyists, they know who they need to talk to, who's going to be voting, and so the other person, the spouse, is not always as important to talk to. And the tables sort of got turned, and Jim was the spouse. I'm not sure that was a real comfortable position for him to be in. And a lot of times I would go alone, and he wouldn't go to a lot of the activities. But when he became state chair, it really was helpful because a lot of the political things that I needed to go to, he also needed to be there because of his responsibilities. So it was really good because then it was a family outing, and sometimes we would take the children with us to, particularly if they were just Democrat type functions, that the kids were along with us, and so that really helped out, I think, and it was, I think it was more comfortable for me, for Jim to feel comfortable with my position, and at that same time I was growing a little bit more comfortable being my own person, and that worked well. It was good timing for him to get involved in the state chair. Though there were times I didn't like it because certainly it doesn't make for great relationships with colleagues when your husband has just recruited a candidate to run against your fellow senator that's a Republican. And so sometimes certainly I got some teasing, and I'm sure some people that were obviously careful what they said to me because they knew of the real partisan nature of the state chair's job.
Mm-hmm. Now tell me, how many children do you have? Three. How old were they when you first became a senator?
Les was 11, so I just had one at that time.
You just had one, okay. And so your other two children were born whilst you were doing, among other things.
Yeah, all of my children are adopted. Our oldest one came to live with us when he was 9 as a foster child. Actually, was 8, almost 9, and was in our home as a foster child for a couple of years, and then became available for adoption, and we adopted him. Then the other two, we have now the one that was 11 then is now 21, obviously, and then I have a 9-year-old that came to live with us when he was 4 days old, and then a baby that's 19 months that came to live with us when he was 2 days old. So Did
you have any warning when this 2-day-old child came? Did you know it was coming?
I did with him. I didn't with the 9-year-old. Because with the 9-year-old, it was kind of bizarre because I just started law school. It's 4 days into law school. I get this phone call. There's been a baby born, and we had wanted to have other children, and I'd had a couple of miscarriages, and it didn't look like that we were going to be able to have biological children. And I was in law school, and I just had gotten started, and we kind of thought, can I still do that and have a baby? And I thought, why not? And so basically, and I was in the Senate at that time too, so it was kind of a real juggle for a couple of years there because with the law school and being in the Senate and with a new baby was a pretty big load for a while.
Sounds like it. At this point, I often ask, how do you handle the commute? In your case, there isn't a big problem with the commute, at least. Could you have done this if you had lived anywhere but Topeka, do you think?
Oh, I think it would have been very difficult for me with the kids the age that they are. And it kind of depends on what Jim would have done. It's different women legislators have handled it differently with their children. Some children have stayed home with husbands. Others have accompanied the woman to Topeka, and husband has too, or sometimes, not sure if we've had very many where the children have come without the husband. I'm not sure about that, but I think it would have been pretty difficult. Certainly you'd have to build up your support systems. I've got kind of like 2 shifts of babysitters. I have the daytime one, and then I have an evening sitter that picks the children up from the daytime babysitter and comes to the house and begins dinner and throws a couple of loads of clothes into the wash and that kind of thing. I could not do the family part of it without that kind of support. And if you can find that, obviously there might be a way to do the commute and all of that. But there's so many hours that it would take doing the commute. I would find it real difficult. It makes it easy. It easier, makes it harder also being in town. Because you certainly have the pros and the cons, because while I'm still here in Topeka, certainly the demands of constituency continue always. I mean, the number of speeches that I give during the session increase, and they're during the week kinds of speeches, because that's when people want to hear about what's going on in the legislature. My counterparts that are from out of town, they have real tough weekends because they are going to coffees and all that, but they don't have the speeches during the week generally. So it's kind of back and forth, and the family responsibilities certainly do take some time in addition to the time you spend in the legislature. Sometimes I think it might be kind of fun just to be here for a couple of months without family, without needing to do, well, like last night, I had several options of things to do, but I ended up going with my son to his open house, which I think it brings you back to reality, though, because I think sometimes the legislature, you can get so wrapped up in it and kind of forget about touching base with the people, your family and the people that really are within your community. And sometimes it's a nice balance to really have both all the time, rather than just on weekends or just at the end of the session or whatever.
How hard is it to maintain a law practice while being a legislator, while campaigning?
Extremely difficult. It's extremely difficult.
How do you do it?
I'm not sure. Sometimes I wonder why I am doing it. I'm certainly concerned a lot of times because there are many times you need to be more than one place at once, and that gets pretty frustrating at times. Certainly the courts are pretty good at working around your schedule, and that's good, but just because the legislature starts doesn't mean that the client's problems disappear and wait 90 days until the session is over. So there's a certain amount of things that need to be continued while you're in the session. And I find myself doing a lot of evening work. Some on Saturdays, though. I really do try to preserve the weekends for the family during the session as well as the rest of the year. But I do come in to meet clients on Saturday mornings. But a lot of it really is just doing the very best you can just to try to piece it together. I also teach an adjunct class for Washburn Law School. Add that on, and which I like doing, but I'm probably going to have to give that up at some point because it does take some additional time as well.
What does it cost you, if anything, other than what you told me, to be in the legislature? What's the downside of being a legislature?
Early in my practice, it probably wasn't as expensive to me as it is now, because until I'm a solo practitioner, I'm not in a partnership, I'm not receiving a set salary for my law practice, so it's whatever I bring in the door. And certainly when I first started the practice, it took a while to build up the practice. At this point in time, I can basically make more in 2 hours of work in my law practice than I can all day in the legislature. So, I mean, if that tells you anything, and I work longer, certainly you work some pretty long hours at the legislature because it's not unusual to work some 12-hour days. If toward the end of the session, it's even longer. So you really are spending a lot of time for not much in compensation. And the other problem that I have from the business standpoint is that my overhead continues even when I'm in session, so I can't cut back on that overhead. If I want this office to be here at the end of the session, I can continue to pay rent on the office. And secretary still's going to have to do my work while I'm in session, the paperwork that I need to do, so there's not a real easy way to cut back on expenses. So that's really a downside, and I think we've seen a real decrease in the number of young attorneys that have run for the legislature or stayed in for any length of time, because I think most people that are in the legislature realize that it's just too hard. It's a little easier being right here in Topeka where my practice is, but those that live a long ways away, it's just almost no way to do it. Partners initially may think it's a good idea because you're going to bring some extra business, but they soon find that you're gone so much that it really is more of a detriment than a benefit to the practice. So I think we all are having that same kind of problem, and we're not the only business that has that kind of problem. The attorneys in the legislature, I'm sure the same thing happens in a number of other businesses as well. But it is problematic, and you have to do a lot of balancing, and you have to do a good job of setting your priorities. And at the same time, you have to be accessible to your constituents, and you can't basically say, I'm not going to meet with you because I know this client's over here. You can't do that and still get elected. I don't believe you can. you have to do the best you can scheduling, but you cannot diminish the time that you ordinarily would spend with constituents because you have clients. Nor can you slight your clients, obviously. I mean, so you're in kind of a tough situation. I think there's some strains that my family feels at times too. I think that's kind of tough too. I mean, if you talk about what does it cost me, I think there's some cost as far as the family life too. But I think there's some benefits. I really see my kids as really having probably benefited more than the detriment. Although my time with them is a little bit shorter than I would like it to, particularly 3 months out of the year. I think they've really enjoyed it, and we've tried to make them a part of, even as far as campaigning and going door to door. They've all done their share of looking envelopes as well.
Has all of this, being in the legislature and so on, changed how people relate to you, do you think?
Some, yeah. Not people that know me very well, but there are times that people, it's like, they're kind of if somebody that just first meets you, they're kind of in awe that you're a real person and talk to you, and like you're supposed to be someone like, someone out of touch to a certain extent, or someone that they can't just talk with on a common level or whatever. But I'm not sure that it changes that much. One thing I think as legislators we have to be real concerned about is that you get rather used to the lobbyists that are very, very nice and very cordial and all of that. But I think you have to realize that a lot of what many of them are doing, it's part of their job to be nice and cordial and all of that. And sometimes it can go to one's head, the compliments, or the type of treatment that you receive from a lobbyist. And so I think that we all have to be careful that we don't change because we think all of a sudden we're a lot better than we were before we came into the office or whatever.
Well, okay. Besides not getting swell-headed, has being in the legislature changed you?
Oh yeah, I think it has a lot in terms of knowledge that I have. I mean, talk about and people that I have met. All of those experiences certainly have really. Yeah, I feel very fortunate, and I feel very lucky to have had all the experience that I've had that I wouldn't have had had not been in the legislature. And the people that I met, I mean, it really just makes your life a lot richer, I think. So I really think I have to. So I've learned a lot about people. All of that, I don't know whether it made me a better person, but certainly a more knowledgeable person, not quite so naive a person as I probably was when I came into the legislature. And I've immensely enjoyed the experience. The part I like the best about the legislature is the people that I work with in the legislature. We have some real characters within both the House and the Senate, and it's been a real joy to meet a lot of those people, and it's been some really good relationships that you build up over the year, and good friendships with people that you may not have ever had a chance to become acquainted with, and that's really a lot of the fun part of being in the legislature. So I think I've grown a lot, probably.
Final question. What else should I have asked you that I haven't asked? What else would you like to get on the record?
Oh, the toughest question. I'm not sure. I think you've really covered most of the things that I would have. I think probably is important. We've talked about family and about the job itself. Maybe how we might predict it will change in the next 10 years.
Okay.
I've been there 10 years, and I'm not sure that I can say that, but I would like to see a lot of the changes that have come about continue to change, because I think there are ways to change the process to make it a more open process, a better process, maybe even more thorough process. one of the things that probably bothers me the most about the legislature, I'm a little bit more of a slow decision maker. I like to be real thorough and have all the information out in front of me. And sometimes the very nature of the legislative session, you've got to make decisions pretty fast. And of course, we spend the next session sometimes correcting those fast decisions we made in the prior legislative session. But I would like to see us look at the way we make decisions and maybe make some changes. And I think women being involved, I think we have a real role to play in making sure that that process over there, where a lot of people criticize the legislature, but that it becomes the very best possible process that it can be, so that we ensure that those decisions that are going to be there, a lot of them for years and years to come, are well thought out, they're well balanced, and that we cross all the T's and dot all the I's when we're dealing with the changes in the law.
Do you think we can do that with 90-day citizen legislature?
It's really tough, and I think you may need to structure it differently than it's structured right now. And it may be that you meet for a month and go home for a month and come back or something. I mean, there may be some other variations that obviously would not be possible without some constitutional changes. But I think it's maybe time to look at the process. Since I've been there, the one thing that I guess I would have to say that has happened that I think is not a good thing that's happened, and that is that so many of the decisions have been delayed until what we now call we used to call the veto session. Now it's like the wrap-up session, where the bulk of some of the most important issues get resolved in about a 7 to 8 day period, which is, maybe it has to be that way, but I don't think it has to be that way. I think there are ways that we can structure our time and our decision making so that we have a little bit, less of a pressurized situation where you have to make a final decision and you don't like any of your choices, and yet you still have to come up with some decision toward the end. I think there are better ways to do it, and certainly I know the public has been real critical of that veto session time, and I think they're just justified at being very critical of him.
Okay.